Welcome to Navigating Complex Divorce and Parenting Issues with Attorney Melanie Walls.
Welcome to Navigating Complex Divorce and Parenting Issues with Attorney Melanie Walls. Melanie is an OSBA certified specialist in family relations law who regularly works with clients on complex financial matters, including the division of retirement assets and divorce. I'm Mack, and today we're focusing on how retirement accounts are handled in Ohio divorce cases, what makes them different from other assets, and what factors influence how they are ultimately divided. Miss Melanie, welcome.
Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So Melanie, what makes retirement accounts different from other assets that are divided in a divorce?
A couple things. The tax consequences associated with retirement accounts if the person receiving those funds at some point later down the road decides to withdraw those funds. And also when you're trying to divide marital assets, 100,000 equity in a house does not equal 100,000 in a retirement account. You're comparing apples to oranges. You need to take a look at the tax consequences and potential penalties for the person that would have those funds who might want to withdraw them at some point. Another issue with retirement accounts is they're not divided at the time of the divorce. You have to have the divorce decree filed first, and then there's an additional process that needs to happen in order to divide those retirement accounts.
So how do you determine what portion of a retirement account is considered marital versus maybe separate property?
When you have two people that are married, you take a look at when did they start their employment. If their employment started before the marriage, then there's a non-marital portion. Typically what you do is you get a retirement fund statement from the date of marriage, and that determines what portion of that account is non-marital. The second step to that would be to get an expert to value the gains and losses on that non-marital portion. So it's not just a matter of saying a spouse had 100,000 in their account prior to marriage. You need to take a look at that 100,000 and what happened to it over the course of the marriage. Did that 100,000 gain or lose? As far as the investments during that time period. So it's a two-step process. What amount did the person have before the marriage, and what happened to those funds during the marriage? And typically the company that values that has to see the statements from the fund during the marriage to determine the gains and losses. And that becomes your final non-marital number once you have the initial amount, and then you have an expert do the calculations of the gains and losses.
So, retirement plans can be structured differently, such as the 401k versus the pensions. How does that difference affect how they're divided?
Well, 401k is a sum certain. You get the statement, that's what you have in your account. So for example, husband has 250,000 in his 401k. Okay, well, maybe half of that goes to the wife. With a pension, that's a payout down the road. So again, that's where you would have an expert look at the pension and value the marital portion of that fund. So one is a sum certain. The pension is a payout down the road after that person retires.
What role does a QDRO play in the division process, and when is it required?
A qualified domestic relations order is the document that actually divides the funds. And that is a process that happens after your decree of dissolution or your decree of divorce is filed. It's a step that some people do not do. I've had people come to me 5-10 years later and say, hey, I was supposed to get half of my spouse's retirement and I never received it. I would go back to the docket and look to see if a qualified domestic relations order was ever filed with the court. And then once it's filed with the court, it also needs to be sent to their plan administrator, because the plan administrator is the person responsible for segregating out those funds to the spouse. And that's a step, unfortunately, that people forget to do. They assume that their divorce decree or decree of dissolution is the end of it. And when you're dividing retirement accounts, there's more work that needs to be done after your marriage has been terminated. There's paperwork that has to be drafted. It has to be signed by all parties. It then gets signed by the judge, filed with the clerk, and that file stamped qualified domestic relations order gets sent to the plan administrator. And that's a very important piece of the puzzle that some people forget to do.
How does the timing, evaluation, or division affect the outcome when retirement assets are involved?
Well, timing impacts a couple of things. So typically when you divide retirement accounts, you would draft the qualified domestic relations order, which would say, 50% plus or minus gains and losses. So you may have a date certain when those funds are divided. You have an end date of the marriage, but you need to include language that says plus or minus gains or losses, because those funds don't get divided overnight. It's a process. The decree goes on, then you draft the qualified domestic relations order, then it goes to the plan administrator. You could be talking 60, 90, 120 days before those funds get divided. So you always want to include gains and losses. You don't want to sum certain, because your client could be losing out on, thousands of dollars that have been accrued on that money while it was sitting there in the fund waiting to be divided.
So what tax implications need to be considered when dividing those retirement accounts?
The division is not an event that triggers tax consequences. The transfer from one spouse to another during a divorce does not trigger a tax consequence. And if that person withdraws the money relatively quickly, it does not trigger a tax consequence. But if a year or two down the road, they decide, I need that money, and they take it out, depending upon their age, not only are there tax consequences, but there could be penalties, a 10% penalty associated with that if they withdraw the funds. So you really need to discuss with your client whether they're going to be keeping those funds for retirement, or if they are intending to, for example, withdraw them in 6 months to possibly purchase a home. You need to find out your client's intentions regarding those funds and discuss the potential tax consequences.
So when one spouse has significantly more retirement savings than the other spouse, how is that imbalance typically addressed in a broader settlement?
Typically, it's done by an offset. So, for example, if spouse one has $500,000 in their 401k and spouse two has $300,000 in their 401k, then there would be a $100,000 transfer to the other spouse to equalize their retirement accounts. So that is typically done by an offset of the two accounts.
So what kinds of issues tend to create problems when retirement assets are divided?
A couple of issues occur when it's a long-term marriage, trying to document the non-marital portion. A lot of times, plans have been transferred from one plan administrator to another, and you go to the current plan administrator and they don't have documentation going back far enough to be able to trace the non-marital portion of that retirement fund. So that's typically where problems come in, is, when there's a non-marital portion, when it's a long-term marriage, trying to go back and find those documents to support the non-marital portion is sometimes difficult.
So to kind of wrap things up, can you kind of describe a situation where the structure of a retirement account or the way it was handled made a meaningful difference in how the case was resolved?
So sometimes you will find people have self-directed retirement accounts. For example, it's not a 401k. they've taken money during their marriage and one spouse or the other has invested those funds and self-directed those funds versus having a financial advisor investing those funds. And it can get pretty messy because you have someone maybe not so savvy in the investment arena, investing funds, buying, selling, moving money around. And it gets difficult to determine, the marital portion and where the money went. And, you may see bank statements where money went, 10,000, 20,000 went into an investment account or even 100,000, and then you're terminating the marriage and there's only 20,000 in that account. Well, where did that 80,000 go? Well, guess what? The spouse made bad investments and that 100,000 is now down to 20,000. So it's a lot cleaner when you have a financial advisor doing the investing and you can see, where the money is.
Miss Melanie, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Navigating Complex Divorce and Parenting Issues with Attorney Melanie Walls. To learn more about Melanie's practice or request a consultation, visit MelanieWallsLaw.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the show so others can benefit from these conversations as well. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.